I'm Leona Godin. I'll be reading from my book, Their Plant Eyes, A Personal and Cultural History of Blindness. This is Chapter 1, Homer's Blind Bard. Homer, the author generally credited with the composition of the Iliad and the Odyssey, two of the oldest works of Western literature, is in large part responsible for the tradition of the blind bard, and yet so little is known about his life that most scholars believe him and his blindness to be legendary. Most accounts of Homer come to us from centuries after he purportedly lived, and even in the ancient world there existed skepticism regarding his blindness, as succinctly represented by Proclus, a philosopher of late antiquity who, in his life of Homer, turned the doubt into a kind of aphorism. Those who have stated that he was blind seem to me to be mentally blind themselves, for he saw more clearly than any man ever. Although this kind of ocular centrism, how can a blind person speak clearly about the visible world, will be echoed about other blind writers from John Milton to Helen Keller, the idea that Homer was blind has endured. The tradition of the blind bard in Western literature originates not in histories or biographies of Homer, but in the Odyssey itself. When Odysseus meets the blind bard Demodocus in the court of King Alcinous, leader of the Phaeacians, the moment feels rather meta. The fictional blind bard of the Odyssey as stand-in for the legendary blind author Homer. The houseboy brought the poet, whom the muse adored. She gave him two gifts, good and bad. She took his sight away, but gave sweet song. The famous passage sets forth the concept reiterated in Western culture again and again, the poetic gift as compensation for the physical lack of sight. Both the lack of sight and the gift of poetry come from the gods. The invocation of the muse at the start of all great epics announces the poet's receptivity, and that receptivity is a matter of ears, not eyes. Sing to me, O muse. I first remember reading, or rather attempting to read, the Odyssey in 10th grade, but by then my eyesight had deteriorated to such an extent that I did not make it very far. After just a few pages took me hours, the words breaking apart before my eyes, making comprehension nearly impossible, I attempted to write an essay about the book without having come anywhere near finishing it. I received a D for the paper, my first, and it was terrible. As an English honors student and a once avid reader, I blamed and hated the teacher for my failure. I would not finish the Odyssey for several years, not until I found myself studying Greek and Latin at UC Santa Cruz. Go Slugs! Only then, as this anomalous creature, a classics major at a school best known for redwood groves and marijuana, did I first begin to identify with blindness in all its complexities and contradictions. In fact, it was my Greek and Latin tutor, paid by Disabled Student Services to give me extra help outside of class, who first made me realize that blindness was not just my future calamity, but also a cultural phenomenon. Did you know, he said, that the ancients revered the blind as poets and prophets? By then, I knew about Homer, of course, but I hadn't really thought about what the blind bard might have to do with me. With my CCTV, a cumbersome video magnification system that blew my Greek and Latin texts into inch-high characters at home, and the bulky packets of passages printed in 40-point font that helped me follow along in class, I did not feel very much like a poet or a prophet. I surely did not feel the compensatory power set forth in the Odyssey and reiterated again and again in Western literature. I did not know then that my tutor's words would set me on my path to read metaphorical blindness against its realities. I did, however, have an inkling that this other blindness, the metaphorical kind, might provide some compensation after all, that I might do well to identify with metaphorical blindness in order to mitigate the intense shame I'd felt throughout my teens. For it was shame that was, from about the age of 12, my dominant feeling with regards to my visual impairment. shame for the many things I could not do, shame at not being able to recognize faces or see street signs, and above all, shame at not being able to read. If I had been a different kind of kid with different kinds of friends, I might have been bummed not to be able to catch a ball, and to be sure, there have been times in my life when play eluded me because of my poor sight. Mostly, however, my friends were the type that smoked, drank, made art, read, and perused used record shops and bookstores. So much time was spent trailing my friends around Green Apple, a used bookshop on Clement Street in San Francisco, that familiar scent of old paper everywhere, scrutinizing the covers in the hopes of being able to find some words, a title or author's name, just to be able to do something, maybe even buy something, and perhaps show it off. For years to come, I would still be able to read very large print, and I could recognize my books by their covers. But by 11th grade, most printed pages held only decorative lines of black ink for me. My inability to read the Odyssey when I was in high school, before I was introduced to all the technology that make books accessible today, echoes an irony at the heart of the blind Homer tradition. The books that have come to us as the Iliad and the Odyssey are written documents derived from a much older oral tradition. The dominance of the written word over that oral tradition made the reality of a blind reader, let alone a blind writer, a near impossibility, at least until the invention of first-raised type and later Braille in the 18th and 19th centuries. Even then, accessing the tools of the trade, the work of other writers, the means of writing, has hardly been easy for the blind writer. Believe me, Jorge Luis Borges said in an interview a year before his death, the benefits of blindness have been greatly exaggerated. If I could see, I would never leave the house. I'd stay indoors reading the many books that surround me. Now they're as far away from me as Iceland, although I've been to Iceland twice, and I will never reach my books. This quote is heartbreaking, coming from a man who headed up the Argentinian National Library and wrote such intricately wrought, book-oriented stories as The Library of Babel. The quote is also, however, surprising and a bit odd, coming as it does from a man who continued to have a wonderful career long after losing his ability to read. If reports of the benefits of blindness have indeed been exaggerated, Borges himself is not innocent. Blindness has not been for me a total misfortune, he explains in his essay Blindness. It should not be seen in a pathetic way. It should be seen as a way of life, one of the styles of living. This reminds me of the rallying cry of the actor and playwright Neil Marcus, who has helped to reify disability culture. Disability is not a brave struggle or courage in the face of adversity. Disability is an art.
Their Plant Eyes, A Personal and Cultural History of Blindness by M. Leona Godin.